So I have 6:01 on my computer. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I know that people are still slowly coming in. This is a great group, so I'm excited to see so many people here. I hope you guys are enjoying your summer. I know mine is going way too fast. To introduce myself, my name is Story Pedley, and I am an academic advisor in the College of Pharmacy at Purdue University. And in addition to advising, I also work with our recruitment team. So a lot of my job is doing events like this. We used to do it all on campus. Obviously, due to COVID, we went to an online option and it was super popular. So we will probably always keep an online option, but also in the fall, campus is opening back up and we will also offer events where you can come to campus and see classrooms and like do a tour of campus, see the pharmacy building and all of that. So just so excited that you guys are here tonight. I know that I probably have some good information to share, but you don't really want to hear from me. You want to hear from our students. We have 2 students with us tonight that are in the program and love talking about their experiences and kind of sharing their wisdom. So I'm going to ask the students to introduce themselves. And if you guys could share your name, your hometown, where you are in the program, like what year and what you're studying, and then talk a little bit about why you chose Purdue and why you chose pharmacy. And on my screen, Sydney, I see you first, so I'll have you go first.
All right. Hi, guys. I'm Sydney. I'm from Mishawaka, Indiana, which is about 10 minutes outside the University of Notre Dame. I am a P3, an incoming P3 in the program, which means that it's my 5th year here at Purdue. And for why pharmacy, my dad is a pharmacist by trade, actually. He doesn't really practice like in the traditional sense anymore. But for the longest time, I thought there's no way I want to do what my dad does. My mom was a pharmacy tech. Like I just remember thinking like, that's my parents' thing. That's not mine. I thought I wanted to be a doctor for a long time. And then right after I'd submitted all of my applications, my parents were like, what about pharmacy? Like you seem like you'd be a good pharmacist. You love math and you're super like picky and organized and you like to catch mistakes. Like this is the perfect job for you. And so I shadowed at my dad's pharmacy and I fell in love with it. And then for why Purdue, I think I always knew that I wanted to go to a big school. I toured some smaller schools and once I came to Purdue, it just kind of felt right. Like I love athletics, like the basketball and the football games are great. And I knew that when I came to the pharmacy building and toured, it just felt like a way that I could make such a big campus feel like inclusive and small enough for my liking. And there's a ton of like great pharmacy clubs on campus along with a ton of other ones. So yeah.
Thanks, Sydney. Nathan.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Nathan. I'm also a P3, so kind of scary to think about, but yeah, 3rd year into the professional program coming in. And I'm from Crown Point, Indiana, so that's Northwest Indiana. I'm right next to Chicago, basically. And I decided to do pharmacy because I'm sure a lot of you guys have the same type of situation where my mom looked at me and said, hey, you're the smartest of your siblings, kind of a thing. You should just be my doctor. So she would always tell her friends like, oh, this kid's going to be my doctor out of my kids. So I was just assumed I was going to do whatever what my mother wanted. So then because of that, at first I thought, okay, maybe I'll like go to medical school, be a doctor, or maybe I could do physical therapy. And then the more I grew up and figured out what I wanted to do, I realized I don't like touching people. So that kind of, took a lot of that out of the way. So ended up stumbling upon pharmacy because of my AP bio teacher senior year, and then just kind of fell in love with it. And then I actually came to Purdue because I was thinking about a couple of different schools, but it really came down to Purdue. I could get this, doctorate of pharmacy in 6 years, and that sounded great to me. And not every university offers that. So
Awesome. Thank you. So it's interesting, Nathan, that you said you don't like touching people. We hear that over and over and over again, that students initially thought maybe med school and ended up choosing pharmacy because pharmacy is just, it's really clean. You don't really have to touch people that often. There's not a lot of blood and guts and bodily fluids. You have that doctorate degree, at least at Purdue, after 6 years. Just so many great opportunities available to you without all of the negatives of med school. So it's interesting that you say that. And I feel like every year I hear more and more people say that that's what drew them to pharmacy. So we're here for about an hour tonight, and the goal is for us to share as much information about Purdue's College of Pharmacy as possible. We are all very casual presenters. So if you guys have questions, you are not going to bother us if you just kind of interrupt and ask a question or put it in the chat, and I will do my best to monitor that and answer questions as we go along. We have lots of things that we can talk about, but I want to make sure that we're talking about things that you're interested in. So as we're talking, just pop something into the chat, or turn your camera on and unmute and just ask away. So I want to start by explaining that in the College of Pharmacy, we have 2 different majors. One is the PharmD program that Nathan and Sydney are both involved in, and that is 2 years of pre-pharmacy coursework. You then apply to pharmacy school, and then once you're admitted, it's 4 years of pharmacy school. So after 6 years at Purdue, you graduate with a PharmD. That would be what you would probably picture in your mind as a traditional pharmacist. So probably the most common career path, or one of the most common career paths with a PharmD, is to work at a Walgreens or a CVS behind the counter in a white coat. That is one option of hundreds of options of what you can do with your PharmD degree. But just to kind of give you an example of that's what a pharmacist does, working with patients, working with medication. The other major that we offer at Purdue, we call it BSPS. It stands for a Bachelor of Science in Pharmaceutical Sciences, and that is a 4-year degree. And that is going to be more for somebody that maybe you want to be the person that's going to cure cancer or cure Alzheimer's. You want to take a current drug and make it work faster, make it less expensive, make it less painful. So it's really focused on drug discovery and drug development, probably more research-based. So the PharmD is going to be more patient-based, and the BSPS is going to be a bit more research-based. Like I said, drug discovery and drug development. Both of those tend to sound very interesting to a lot of incoming students, and they think, oh my gosh, I don't know how to pick. The good thing is both of those programs have a very similar curriculum for the first 2 years. So while you're taking classes and figuring out what makes sense, you can keep the door to pharmacy school and BSPS open while you figure that out. And during your first semester, you take a class called Pharm 100. And it's really just an orientation class so that you can learn about pharmacy, learn about different career paths, and learn about all of the things that are available to you. Sydney and Nathan, do you guys want to talk a little bit about maybe where you think you'll end up working when you graduate? Like, what does your career look like today? And I know you can change your mind 10 more times, but today, what do you think it might look like?
Yeah, so it's kind of a running joke in the pharmacy I work with that I'm like of hospital pedigree. My whole family has always been in hospital pharmacy, and it's exactly where I think I want to be. I've been working at my local hospital for a couple of years now, and it's right at my alley. I like that, there are so many different positions that the pharmacists work at, even within the hospital. Like, some do home infusion medications, some do like responding to codes. Like, there's all sorts of variety. And I just really like the setup. And I think that acute care setting is kind of like right up my alley. So that's my goal, but I'm also in a nuclear certificate program. It's a really great side thing kind of that Purdue offers if you're interested in it. And it's the chance to get all of your kind of classroom work done so that you could become like a certified nuclear pharmacist and make the isotopes and the drugs that are used for mostly like imaging kind of studies or thyroid studies. But yeah, so I've got hospital, that's kind of like my go-to, but I also think nuclear is a great option.
Can you share a little bit about what you mean by acute care?
Yeah, so acute care is pretty much anybody that's in the hospital with something that kind of needs to be treated now, like it can't wait. So you wouldn't consider it to be like ambulatory care where a patient is walking in and maybe walking home. Acute care would be like you just had a stroke, you just had a heart attack, you have a really bad infection that we need to treat at the hospital.
Thank you. Nathan, what about you?
So yeah, mine's kind of flipping every single week that I think about it, but the two that kind of come into my head the most is doing sort of, the flip of what Cindy was saying, going into ambulatory care, where I was able to shadow a pharmacist who she had a sweet gig where basically in between the nurse and the doctor coming in to see a patient at this clinic, she would go in and she specialized in diabetes. So she mainly saw all of the diabetes patients, talk to them about their diabetes, talk to them about their insulin, whatever medications there are, kind of adjusted those for them. So that was a neat, experience for me where I got to see like a pharmacist actually get to have that interaction with a patient and actually be able to make bonds with their patients. That sounds really cool to me. So I would love to do that. And then I am also in the nuclear program. And if I were to go into nuclear pharmacy, it'd be a lot of like lab work, drawing up doses, doing a lot of mixing, things like that. So I've always liked the idea of working in some type of lab. So it kind of draws me to it.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe you guys, that's a good segue to have you talk a little bit about, in my opinion, the benefit of this PharmD, that it's kind of a generalist degree. And then based on courses that you choose, internships, summer experiences, you can gain experience in lots of different areas and you don't have to pick a specialty during your time in pharmacy school, unless it's something like nuclear where you have to get additional certification. So can you talk a little bit about how Purdue has prepared you for multiple different career paths?
Yeah, I think, and hopefully it doesn't scare anybody. I think a lot of people get to like the end of their school and they're like, I still kind of don't know what I want to do. Like I have all these options. Even like last semester, I took a veterinary pharmacy elective. And I mean, if you want to be a veterinary pharmacist, that's really all you have to take. And you even don't have to take it. It's just kind of like a nice primer. So there's kind of like, fun careers like that I would have never thought even existed before I got into pharmacy school. And a lot of people at Purdue tend to go the industry route too. So like you don't have to have a BSPS if you want to work for Pfizer or Eli Lilly, and maybe you want to help run clinical trials. Like they always need PharmDs for that kind of stuff too. So I think that's another big route that I've seen a lot of fresh graduates taking. But yeah, like you don't have to have any kind of like additional schooling, additional certification. I know like in medical school, you kind of have to specialize a little bit. And in pharmacy, that's kind of true to a degree. If there's like certain very specialized positions you want, a residency is usually something that people pursue. But it's definitely by no means something that you have to do. So yeah, there's a ton of options. And I mean, people weigh their options right until the end. So
yeah. Thanks. Any thoughts that you want to add to that, Nathan?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, I mean, we're forced to take electives when we're in the College of Pharmacy, so might as well make the most of it. There's so many different varieties of electives, and that's really neat and interesting because you can kind of be like, oh, maybe I do want to take this industry elective, kind of figure out, dip my toes in, see if I want to do it, or oh, take the nuclear one. Maybe you hate it. That's okay. I mean, you went towards your degree. It's something that you now know that you don't want to do anymore, or you could end up loving it. So there's a lot of variety. There's a lot of electives that come in. Like I know next semester I'm taking one on addiction that I don't know, maybe I'll love it, maybe I won't. Who knows? That's kind of the fun of it.
Thanks. Is anybody wanting to ask a question before we go on to another topic? Okay. I'm going to ask this.
I'm sorry, I had a quick question though. I'm
Yes,
sorry.
of course.
So you don't have a direct admit to PharmD program, right? So you have those two tracks like you just described. For my daughter's a high school rising senior. So either it would be a BS in pharmaceutical sciences, or you enter basically this pre-pharmacy track, and after 2 years, you kind of decide which way you want to go, right?
Correct.
Okay. So typically when you get a BS in pharmaceutical sciences, you obviously have to go to grad school, I imagine, if you want to do research, right? So
Typically.
where do your students, so that I have a two-part question. One is, where do students, what kind of degrees they get? And for Sydney and Nathan, it's really awesome that you're sharing a lot of perspective. Why you pick PharmD versus BS in pharmaceutical sciences is what I would like to know too.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I can speak on why I chose PharmD. I did a little bit of research in high school, and I just immediately knew it was not my jam. Pharmacy is very chemistry oriented. So it's funny that I ended up here because I am not a chemistry girl. It was like my worst subject in college. So I think I mainly chose the PharmD, again, because I kind of knew I wanted that patient interaction. I wanted to be, working with disease states and dealing with medications versus kind of like researching them and developing them, since it's just not my specialty.
Yeah, my thought when I decided to do PharmD instead of BSPS was basically the only path I would have taken if I did BSPS was doing research, which that's something that I would have liked. It would have been cool to do, but I liked the idea of, seeing patients daily, interacting with their, day-to-day life kind of a thing, and seeing that immediate payoff. And honestly, when I thought about like, oh, do I really want to, try to front my own research, like operation or create a drug, anything like that? Honestly, that just seems way too daunting to me, and like way too much. That's something that I just could not personally do.
So Nathan, you wanted patient, but you didn't want to touch them, right? So that's that's
Like,
good.
I love interacting with people. I just don't want to be the person.
I see your point. So I think, as Sydney said, if you are interested in research and chemistry heavy, it's the pharmaceutical sciences. So PharmD, although the D is for doctorate, right? So it doesn't have any research or thesis or dissertation to be done at all? Okay.
Correct.
Okay. If I'm talking too much, please cut me at any point, because I have others to.
This is great, because it sounds to me like nobody else is asking questions, and you're probably asking what everybody is thinking. So I'm very appreciative, and I want to make sure we talk about things that you guys are interested in. So I appreciate it. Sydney and Nathan, do you guys want to share maybe your favorite class that you've taken so far? And then on the flip side of that, maybe either your least favorite or hardest class? And you could include pre-pharm and or PharmD.
That's tough. I think I'll have to kind of make it a two-part question. My favorite pharmacy class, I can't think of what it was called officially, but it was taught by Dr. Morawski, and it was like health it wasn't health policy, but it was pretty much like he would teach us about the healthcare system, how it works. And I think mostly what made it fun was Dr. Morawski, because he's quite the character. And so you would go into class and you never knew what to expect. Like, he would send us crazy emails talking about what we were going to do, and everybody would get super excited. So that was for sure my favorite in-person class. And the information is actually very necessary. I need to know how insurance works and that kind of stuff. And then my favorite non-Purdue class, my favorite non-pharmacy class would be, I took geosciences in the cinema. And all we did was watch doomsday movies. So Twister and Geostorm, and there's other silly ones. And we would watch them outside of class, but then we would come back and the professor would tell us like what was accurate, what wasn't accurate. And we would kind of like learn a little bit too about the different geosciences. And was there something else you needed me to answer?
Maybe like your least favorite or hardest class?
I guess I kind of alluded to it already, but general chemistry was way tough for me. Part of the reason too was that's like your pre-pharmacy years. And so you're still kind of with a very large group. I think my lecture had like 400 people in it. And so it was just something that I wasn't totally prepared for yet. I didn't really have my study habits probably where they needed to be going out of high school. So I think I would do better knowing what I know now, but it was really challenging at the time.
Yeah, so I guess my favorite class would actually also be Dr. Mrowski's class because all of his information was very relevant. Like he was really big about putting in his personal input about how we could change like the United States healthcare system and things like that, but also was very willing to have us like give us, put in our own input. I mean, it was kind of challenging in his class sometimes because if some people said something that was just blatantly wrong, but I mean, that's just kind of how he is, and we just all had to live with that. But it was also a breath of fresh air in like a semester that was also very heavy on like doing a bunch of like drugs, anything, learning a bunch of medications. So those classes are always great. And then I also really enjoyed organic chemistry. I'm sure Sydney had someone for her, but I was that person in my friend group where whenever it came up to organic chemistry class, I'd be sitting in a room with 15 other people just looking at me saying, how do I do this? And I was the one guy who knew how to do it. So I guess I just enjoyed it more so because it was stroking my ego. And then but the one class that I was like, didn't like the most was probably our drug info class. So sometimes I feel like I'm completely illiterate and don't know how to read. So it's really challenging for me sometimes to go through and look at medical journals and things like that. And that's the whole point of the class, was to go through those, figure out what they did right, what they did wrong, critique these things, and just kind of understand how to go through all of this, highly intelligent information that we're going to need to know at some point, pretty much.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about, for those of you that are interested in the PharmD program, just a little bit about the application process. So you will actually start the application during your first semester of your sophomore year. So you will have only been at Purdue for about a year when you actually will start the application to pharmacy school. So that can feel a little overwhelming. Like you just got admitted to Purdue and now we're going to start another application process. Because it comes so quickly, we allow and encourage students to use things from high school. So if you're doing some really great leadership, some really great community service and volunteer work, those things can be put on your pharmacy school application. So don't feel like you've got to kind of start over once you get to Purdue. And the application is going to be looking at things very similar to what you're going to do to be a competitive applicant to Purdue. Leadership and GPA and community service, but then and an essay and letters of recommendation. The one thing that would be additional would be we want students to do some shadowing. So if you guys, after this session tonight, kind of brainstorm with some other members of your family and think about who you know in the pharmacy field. Maybe it's a neighbor, a friend from church, a family member, somebody that you can reach out to. Maybe it's a friend of a friend of a friend that you can say, hey, could I spend an afternoon shadowing you in the hospital, in the pharmacy, in the clinic? And just start kind of getting some of those hours in, and it's all on the honor system. So you don't have to have that pharmacist sign off on anything. It's really just so that you can get a really good idea of what your future career might be. Sydney and Nathan, do you guys want to talk a little bit about like what was your experience with the application process and maybe some advice that you have for high school students? And then maybe something that you did to help set yourself apart.
Yeah. So I think I remember like sitting in your spot, what, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and being like, oh my gosh, I have to apply to college and I have to apply again. Like that sounds terrible. Um, and it was really daunting. I think the shadowing freaked me out because I was like, shoot, I know my dad, but I don't know anybody else. Like where am I going to go get these shadowing hours at? And for starters, like it's totally normal to just cold call pharmacies. That's what I did, and nobody turned me down. I called my local CVS and my local Walgreens and my local nuclear pharmacy, and that's how I got my shadowing hours. And I didn't know anybody there previously. I just said, hey, I'm a Purdue student, and I really love to shadow for the day. And they're used to it. Like it's a pretty normal thing to do. And I will say, as far as the actual application process, I think it's gotten even more straightforward than it used to be when Nathan and I applied. Because now I think all you have to do is fill out the PharmCast application that gets sent to like all other pharmacy schools if you're applying to more than one. But I only applied to one. I only applied to Purdue because I knew I wanted to be here. And I felt pretty good about my application, even though I was a little nervous about like my grades because I didn't do great in pre-pharm. And I think my biggest piece of advice is do not get too bogged down about your grades. Like there's so many ways to stand out on your application. And I mean, grades are important. They want to make sure that, you know, you're trying, but they really want to make sure that you're well-rounded, you know how to take time for yourself. You're getting relevant experience and pretty much that you have like a work-life balance. So I would say, yeah, don't stress about having a 4.0 GPA. There's always like, I don't even know if it's true at this point, but there's always this like lingering story you hear about so-and-so with a 4.0 didn't get in because they didn't do anything else. And I mean, it's true. Like, I wouldn't want my pharmacists to just sit inside and read all day. Like, I want them to have people skills and know how to lead a team. So, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, with when I was going through the application, obviously very nervous. I mean, I didn't do much in high school, so I felt like I had to cram a bunch of stuff in once I got to college and in high school I was content just playing sports and then not doing any other clubs because I had all my friends in sports and they were all doing other sports. So why did I need to do any clubs? And then come to college, obviously I'm not a college athlete. That'd be insane. Although there are college athletes in the College of Pharmacy, they're able to do it. Shocks me every day, but there's a lot of people who do it. But anyway, so my entire thing out of that is don't be afraid to like, you know, really reach out and do many different types of clubs. There's so many organizations on Purdue's campus. You don't have to do a bunch of you don't have to do a bunch of pharmacy things. You can do a bunch of clubs outside of the pharmacy, use that to meet a bunch of new people. And then, yeah, that's my big advice for it anyway.
Yeah, that's great. And I know both of you mentioned this a little bit. It is truly a holistic review for the application process. So like Sydney said, if you are worried that maybe you're weak in one area, maybe it's grades, maybe it's shadowing, if that's the case, then really beef up all the other areas of your application because that can make up for a weakness in another area. And then there's a class that you will take during that first semester of your sophomore year called Pharm 200. And it really focuses on the entire application process. And you'll have the head of the admissions committee come and speak, and you'll have a student panel of students that are in the program that can talk about their experiences. And then every advisor, we all are well aware of the expectations and the requirements for pharmacy school. So we are constantly working with our students on making sure that they are competitive applicants and are doing all that they can to make sure that they get admitted. There are a few questions in the chat. So I'm going to ask these, and then Sydney and Nathan, you guys can answer. Okay, it says, do you need test scores to apply to pharmacy school? So I'm assuming you're referring to the PCAT. So the PCAT is an entrance exam, much like the MCAT for med school or the LSAT for law school. Purdue does not require the PCAT. The majority of pharmacy schools do require it. We do not. We have found that the PCAT scores really don't predict success in pharmacy school much beyond the first year. And so we thought if we can eliminate a standardized test for you guys, we're going to do it. So no, Purdue does not require the PCAT. The other question is, what is the homework load like in pre-pharm versus professional pharmacy? Like how much time per day do you spend on it, and how do you have a balance? How do you balance that with work and life? Great question.
So I can go first on that. I definitely was kind of a bit of an overachiever in high school. Like I would go to school from 8 to 3 or whatever. And then I would have my clubs afterwards. Then I would go to work for 4 hours. Then I would go home and it would be like 9. So compared to that, pre-pharmacy was a breeze. But I also was kind of lucky because I had a lot of incoming credits from like APs, ACP classes. So my first couple of semesters were pretty light, like almost the lightest I could go with still being a full-time student. It's like 12 credit hours. But you'll quickly realize that even in pre-pharmacy, and especially into real pharmacy school, homework is almost like non-existent. It'll happen, but the majority of the time that you spend is going to be looking at your notes, studying, working on projects. But as far as homework, like I can't say that for many of our classes, Nathan and I have ever had like religious homework assignments. If I had to put a number on it, I don't know how many hours per day I spend. Probably overall, I probably spend like, I don't know, 5 hours when I get home, just kind of like looking over my notes, fixing my notes, but it's not necessarily all focused, intense study time. Like I'm a pretty lax studier. Like I'll sit on the couch and format my notes or something, but yeah.
Yeah, thinking about the homework load, pre-pharmacy, like the only classes that I remember having homework assignments in was like chemistry courses and calculus. And then everything else, there might be a homework assignment sprinkled in here or there, but I mean, none of them were really that hard to do. And then once you get into like the actual program, if you go into PharmD, you get even less homework. I feel like all of your homework just turns into studying your notes, getting prepared for exams, things like that. But by the time you get into the program, you really have a good idea of how to just organize your time and get used to studying and constantly having information thrown at you. Because that was a big slap in the face for me freshman year of college, was just coming in. I didn't study for anything in high school, basically. I was happy skirting by with like B's and everything. So that didn't really work out too well in once you get to college. So I had to quickly learn how to just, organize my time with, schoolwork and all of that. But even with that slap in the face, I remember during my pre-pharmacy years, I was still able to work as a basketball referee on campus. I even did that into like the college, like once I got admitted to the program. And then I also worked as like a tutor on campus. So I was still able to work jobs in between like doing homework and still be able to like go to all the football games, all the basketball games, things like that. So it's very doable once you understand how to make that balance.
Yeah, it is. You have to learn it and you have to practice those time management skills. So will you guys talk a little bit about what you do for fun? Like we got a little bogged down in all the academics, which is great. I know you guys need to know that too, but talk a little bit about maybe some clubs that you're involved in, some jobs that you've held. I know, Nathan, you talked just a little bit about that now, but like, what do you do for fun and how do you create that work-life balance?
Believe it or not, I am in some of my pharmacy clubs for fun. Kappa Epsilon is one of my favorites. It's a professional fraternity, which like pretty much think of, the ones with houses on campus. We don't have a house. It's only for people that are in pharmacy. But it was a really great source of mentorship for me, especially when I was a pre-pharm student. I was nervous about getting in and I didn't think my grades were good enough. There were a lot of girls there that were super helpful. And like all of my pharmacy friends are from Kappa Epsilon. So I think that was a great way to kind of build my social circle on campus. Like I mentioned earlier, I love going to the basketball games and the football games. If you have the chance to buy the boarding pass, I highly, highly recommend it. It's like $100 and you get to go to all the football games for free. and some of the basketball games. I think if you like enter a lottery or something. So that's a great deal. What else do? I do a lot of reading, which is kind of a nerdy hobby, but it's a great de-stressor. And it's a great way to just like de-stimulate at the end of a day and just sit in silence for a little bit. And then this year I just got a cat, and that has been a great stress reliever. So wouldn't recommend it if you're living in a dorm, but once you are off campus, it has been a really great buddy to have around.
What's your cat's name?
Cleo.
Oh,
Yeah, so that's what's mostly been taking up my time lately, and it's been really great.
So for fun, like I said, I ref basketball, so obviously I really enjoy basketball. So I did that not as much because I wanted the money from it, but more so because I like basketball, which then leads into Purdue sports. Like football games are so much fun, excited for this next season. We're excited for the basketball season, not only because we're better at basketball, but you get the theme. And then other than that, I mean, Purdue's in the Midwest. A lot of Midwest people go to Purdue. I mean, if any of you are from the Midwest, you know, there's not always a lot to do. So you always make something to do if you can't find something to do. So just getting into organizations that just, you know, find a lot of friends. Like I joined Purdue University Dance Marathon, just raising money for Riley Children's Hospital in Indy. So because of that, I got to meet so many different people from so many different places around the country and some, you know, internationally. And just hanging out with them just really brought me into just understanding so many different people and realizing there's so many different things that I could do. And then on top of that, if I'm just by myself, have like, you know, people are busy, have a couple hours on my hand, I just binge watch anime. It's like really comforting to me, and that's just how I get through my life.
awesome. I love hearing how different you guys are. I mean, you're in the same program in the same year, but everybody is so different, even though you're doing such similar things. So I love hearing those stories. There is a question in the chat that says, how many people are accepted into the pharmacy program every year? So that's good. I'm going to give you guys kind of a rundown of the numbers real quick. So every year we bring in to the PharmD program a class size of 150. Let me back up a little bit and kind of give you a bigger picture of what that means. So every year, Purdue's College of Pharmacy brings in a freshman class, so straight from high school, a freshman class to a pharmacy major, we bring in around 300 students. So like I mentioned, you would apply to pharmacy school during the first semester of your sophomore year. By the time that application rolls around, there are around 200 students that are applying to our pharmacy school. So 300 freshmen, about 200 will apply. Maybe it's some don't apply because they're in the BSPS program and have no intention of becoming a pharmacist. Some, maybe they didn't do great in their freshman organic chemistry class and they decided maybe this is not the best career path for me. So we have 200 pre-pharmacy students from Purdue apply, and then we have another 200 to 300 students from other institutions applying to our pharmacy school. So maybe they're at a community college or a regional campus, maybe they're out in California or Rhode Island and they're applying to Purdue's College of Pharmacy. So every year we get around 400 to 500 applications for a class size of 150. We interview 250, and to give you kind of an idea, historically, of that class size of 150, around 120 to 130 are Purdue pre-pharm. So we really nurture our pre-pharm students. We know that that is an amazing pipeline, and we really try to take care of our students. And like I mentioned, we do lots of activities to make sure the students understand the expectations of the application. We do, I think Kappa Epsilon might even do this, like mock interviews, and they'll do a panel to talk to students about what to expect during the process. There are upper class students that will do an application review, and they'll look at a student's application prior to the deadline so they can maybe catch some spelling mistakes, or, you might want to think about adding this to your essay. So lots of ways to make sure that students are feeling prepared for pharmacy school. Anything that you two want to add to that?
I guess I would just say, yeah, I think my incoming class, we had like 7 students that weren't from Purdue, which is a really small group. And kind of like what you said, Purdue does a great job just like telling us what the expectations are up front. I don't know if we do it like if we send them out virtually anymore, but I remember when I came in, they give you this kind of like circle chart, and it's got different sections in it. And that's basically what you need to get in. You need at most like 4 of this, 4 of this, 4 leadership, 4 volunteer max or whatever. So I think it was just going in from the beginning. I knew what the expectations were, and I knew kind of how I was going to be spending the next 2 years to fill up my pie chart, is what we called it. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And I'm looking at the question here, and it says, what percentage of pharmacy students are admitted from other colleges such as IUPUI if I were to do pre-pharm somewhere else? So I don't want anyone to think that there's like an added benefit or an added bonus if you do your pre-pharm at Purdue. We look at all students equally. It is not like you don't get a bonus point or a demerit based on where you do your pre-pharm work. I think one of the biggest things that allows the Purdue pre-pharm students to be so competitive is they have access to faculty easily to get that mentorship. They have access to our advising office to get advice and counsel. They have access to all of these resources to learn about the application process. Now, having said that, if any of you are thinking of doing pre-pharm somewhere else, which maybe that means it's cheaper, maybe that means it's more convenient, just stay in touch with our office. Maybe once a semester, shoot us an email and say, here's where I am. Could you look at what I've been doing? Maybe give me some advice on what I could think about doing next semester or this summer. And we are available to all students, not just Purdue pre-pharm. So we work with all students that are applying to our pharmacy school. So just stay in touch with us and ask lots and lots and lots of questions. Anybody else have a question that they want to ask? Yeah.
Can I ask a couple of follow-up, please? So I'm trying to understand the whole process. So students can do pre-pharm anywhere, and through the PharmCAS, apply to any pharmacy school across the country?
Correct. So
Okay.
PharmCAS is like the Common App, but for pharmacy schools.
Okay. But like you said, some schools may require a PCAT, so in which case you have to be careful in terms of picking which schools you're going to apply, right? Because if some may or may not, like Purdue doesn't require PCAT. What fraction of schools require PCAT? Just approximately?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I would say maybe a quarter
Oh, okay.
require it. So the majority of them will require it.
Okay. And if students don't get into the PharmD program, they will continue along the BS-TS line and get a degree in pharmaceutical sciences, correct?
That's one option. What I tend to see for students that don't get admitted, a student is, this is going to be an overgeneralization, but typically one of 2 types of students. One is, I really, really, really want to be a pharmacist. I hope it's at Purdue, but if it's not, I would be willing to open up my application to other schools and apply to other pharmacy schools if Purdue does not admit me. So that's one option, or they would stay and reapply the following year at Purdue. The other option would be, I really, really want to be a Purdue graduate. I hope it's in pharmacy, but if it's not, I would be willing to look at other majors. Maybe BSPS, maybe they just really struggled in those math and science classes and they decided that's it, I'm gonna major in art history or theater or something completely different. But for any student that's not admitted, we strongly encourage them to reach out to our office. We will pull their application and we will sit down and give them some advice and counsel on what were their weaknesses and what could they do to improve if they're willing or interested in reapplying. So we only accept one class every year, so they would need to wait an entire year to reapply. However, our deadline is actually really early. Our deadline is January. Most pharmacy schools do not have a deadline till March, even as late as June. So if a student is interested in kind of casting a wide net, they apply to Purdue's pharmacy school, but also think, you know what, I'm going to just kind of play it safe and apply to some other schools as well. We would just encourage that student to, maybe they're going to still have to take the PCAT. Maybe that other pharmacy school requires 2 semesters of physics and we only require 1. So things like that, that we would want them to be kind of thinking about a little earlier so that they are a better candidate for all of those programs.
Excellent. Thanks for the detailed
Yeah.
response. But for the BS Pharmaceutical Science, there's a screening process. If they really like the science, and if they like their math and chemistry classes, and if they want to continue, they can continue and get their BS Pharmaceutical Science. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we actually have students that will, so if they weren't admitted, they'll pursue the BSPS and reapply. And then that makes it really easy for a student to have both the BSPS degree and the PharmD degree, which for industry might make them a little more marketable.
Okay, thank you.
I see another question. Would you recommend or suggest, or is one able to apply to multiple pharmacy schools since Purdue is so competitive if you feel they're walking a fine line? And so I think I did touch on this a little bit. The majority of students that come to Purdue for pre-pharmacy have the intention of going to Purdue's pharmacy school. So not a lot of students, and I think Sydney, you mentioned this, not a lot of students apply to other pharmacy schools except for Purdue. But every year we do have students that, I've had several students tell me that they applied to 5 pharmacy schools just because they wanted to see if they could get in and kind of keep the door open to lots of different paths. Even though they knew I'm probably going to stay at Purdue, it was nice to know that they had options. And again, we would just encourage those students to make sure they're looking at the different application components of all of those schools so that you don't get to the application and go, oh, shoot, I didn't know I needed this class, or I didn't know I needed to do the PCAT. So we would just make sure that you're looking at all of those things. But yes, absolutely. Let us know early on if you're interested in, a lot of times an out-of-state student might be better off applying to the pharmacy school in their home state. So again, we can help those students be a competitive applicant to lots of different programs. And then what are some of the classes that people usually take in high school to prepare for pharmacy school? That's a great question. Sydney or Nathan, do you guys have some thoughts on that?
I guess my opening piece would be, I don't really know if there are any high school classes that can properly prepare you other than just, taking the hardest ones you can to try and figure out how you're supposed to study. I took like a biomedical sciences class in high school, and I can't say that anything I learned in there was especially helpful for pharmacy. But yeah, I think just taking the hardest classes you can, figuring out what study method works best for you now, and even just getting those shadowing opportunities in now. Because I know my high school didn't do a lot of career prep. Like it was either, oh, you like science, like you're going to be a doctor. And that was kind of all she wrote. Like nobody had ever spoken to me about pharmacy at my high school. So I think just going out there and making those opportunities for yourself.
Yeah, I'll kind of echo the same thing where it's just sometimes taking the hardest classes you can your senior year is nice. I mean, I had a lot of friends who took easier classes their senior year just to kind of take it off. But were to have done that, then I mean, I wouldn't have gotten to take an AP calculus and AP bio. And both of those like were the 2 things that kind of started to get me to a place where I'm just like, okay, this is how I should be studying and this is what I should be learning. And then, I mean, even some of those things kind of carried through into the pre-pharmacy years, because any it's like, so say you don't test out of, calculus, if you're taking AP calculus, for example, you'll still remember some of it for when you have to take the class again, if that were to happen in college, or even with like AP bio. Some of that stuff might come into handy in, the bio classes that you have to take, or even the anatomy class you'll have to take.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got about 9 minutes left. If there's any other questions, please pop them in the chat. But I'm going to ask our students to maybe end with, and I know you talked a little bit about this in terms of classes to take in high school, but maybe some words of wisdom, some parting advice, maybe something you wish you knew in high school that would have made the transition easier, and not necessarily pharmacy, but just maybe the transition from high school to college. Any kind of last words that you want to share?
I think I wish I would have known, I guess I kind of alluded to this earlier, like grades are not that serious. After I got like my C in chemistry during pre-pharm, I went to my advisor's office and I was convinced like I was never going to get into pharmacy school because of this C. And it so didn't matter. Even she was like, it doesn't matter, you're going to be fine. So grades aren't everything. And I've heard it from my older friends. I've heard it from the pharmacists I work with. They always say like, you are never going to regret, going out and having fun with your friends. Like that's the stuff you're going to remember. You're not going to remember the A you got in your therapeutics class or that time that you studied really hard. Like you're going to remember the time you spent with your friends. And college is, the place you're supposed to learn and get prepared for your job, but it's also like cliche, the best time of your life. And it would be a real shame to waste it, having no fun. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess my tidbit is kind of the same thing of don't be afraid to, go out that weekend, even if, say, you got an exam on like a Wednesday or something like that, or even if you have an exam on a Monday and your friends are doing something over the weekend. Just kind of study for that exam the week before and start even earlier than you would have, kind of a thing. And then you still be able to have time to go out and have fun with your friends. And then just on top of all of that, just just kind of focus on yourself as much as you can, because if you just get wrapped up in what everyone else is doing, then you're gonna feel like, oh, so-and-so's doing this, so-and-so's doing that, but I'm only doing this. So then because of that, completely lose yourself in what everyone else is doing, and just you no longer have track of what you need to do to help yourself.
Yeah, great advice. So there's a few questions in here. I'm going to do my best to get to all of them. There's a question about tuition. If you guys go to the Purdue website, there is a tuition calculator. So you can see what your tuition will be as a pre-pharm student. And then once you're in pharmacy school, you're considered a professional student. So then you can kind of recalculate what it would be as a professional student. And there's a question about, are you able to complete a minor? Are either of you guys pursuing minors?
No, I know it's super easy to get a biology minor.
Yeah.
It honestly just came down to the fact that like I didn't really want to take that one extra class, and I just didn't know if a biology minor would really be helpful in any future career. But a lot of people do take minors, and they take them in things that are actually relevant, like a Spanish minor would be so helpful for pharmacy, especially if you want to do community. So it's easy to do. You can fit it in, especially if you're, if you want to do it from the jump, talk to your advisor and make sure that you can fit it in. If you have to take summer classes, it's a possibility. But yeah, I know biology, our curriculum lines up really well, and all you need to do is take one extra class and you have a biology minor. So.
Nathan, do you have a
minor? I'm also not taking any minors, but just I know people who are getting a business minor because they think, oh, I can mix business in with whatever they're going to do with their pharmacy major. So because of that, I know someone who didn't even start taking the first business course that he needed until his second semester of his sophomore year. So like he did most of them while in the program, and I think next semester he'll have his last one. So
Yeah, so at Purdue, the majority of minors will require anywhere from 4 to 6 additional classes in that major. There are a few that, like Sydney was saying, overlap. So the courses that you're taking for pre-pharm are also required for that minor. So there are a few that are very easy to complete. By no means required. It does not, I think if you ask 10 people, you'll get 10 different opinions on the value of a minor. If you're interested in a certain subject and you think it would pair nicely with a PharmD, I think it makes perfect sense. Like Sydney was saying, a foreign language pairs nicely. If you think like maybe you're really interested in health and wellness and diet, maybe getting a minor in dietetics and nutrition would make sense. If you're really interested in mental health, maybe a minor in psychology would make sense. So it's such an individual decision. And, you know, some people will say, oh, if you have a minor, it's going to really set you apart from everybody else in the interview pool. Other people will say, nobody's even going to know or care. So again, it's just personal preference on what makes sense to you, on what your area of interest is, and maybe where you see yourself professionally somewhere down the road. But yeah, if you let your advisor know, we will absolutely work with you to make sure that you can get those done. And if you're in the PharmD program, you have 6 years to complete your minor instead of 4 in the BSPS program. There's a question about scholarships. Yes, scholarships are available to incoming freshmen, and that is Purdue money. And then once you're in either your 3rd and 4th year of BSPS, or once you're in the professional program, the College of Pharmacy has scholarship money. So once you're in the program, there is more money available to you. And then as you're applying as a freshman, there's Purdue money available to you. And then of course, you're welcome to look at outside institutions for additional scholarship money. There's a question about in-state tuition if you're not an Indiana resident. Purdue, the state of Indiana makes it really difficult to switch your state of residency. So for example, the example that you gave, if you're an Illinois resident, if you want to become an Indiana resident, you have to live in the state of Indiana for a year. However, the main reason for you living in the state for that year cannot be being a student full-time. So if you're willing to be a part-time student and get a job, so then you're paying taxes in the state of Indiana, after a year, you could apply for Indiana residency. So it's not super convenient, but I guess it is an option. I want to say thank you so much to everybody who is here tonight. I know there are probably a million things you could have been doing. We so appreciate your time. We absolutely appreciate your interest in Purdue and the College of Pharmacy. I'm going to put my email in the chat. If you guys have questions, please send me an email and I will do my best to answer anything that I can. And like I said, this is being recorded, so we will post this on the College of Pharmacy website so that if you have friends or your family members want to watch this later, or you just wanted to get some more information, that'll be available to you. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a great evening. Thank you guys. I so appreciate your help. I love doing these, and I just love how well-spoken you guys are. Like, you're honest. Like, you don't say, oh, it's all rainbows and butterflies. Like, you're honest. It's hard. It was stressful, but I think it's so helpful to get a student's perspective and to hear you guys tell your stories. And I just really appreciate you. Thank you both. Have a great night.